So with a great deal of pride, I would like to introduce Paul and Mary Beth, his mother. I met Mary Beth, I think 3 years ago, when I was teaching a family-to-family class. And this lady came in, she appeared a little pale, and she would describe her son and some of the challenges that at that time he was very symptomatic and he was not receiving treatment. And, I'm listening and just wondering, where is this all gonna go? At one point, Paul actually participated in some of our NAMI meetings and was still pretty symptomatic. And this whole time, Mary Beth just held out this hope for her son. And throughout the time that I've known her, you could just see the mother's love for her son. And this is, the book is really a testimony to the family's support of someone that has a serious mental illness and how that person has reciprocated. And so today we're going to hear from Paul, who has written his book, and we've all held it up. I'm also a peer, so I understand, the stigma that he has faced. And I so admire Paul and his mother for not only going on with their life, but they didn't just leave. They have returned time after time to share their story. Mary Beth attends every one of our NAMI support groups. Her husband doesn't. He does every once in a while. We love to see Paul, but Mary Beth is always there. And she's there, even though her son has been able to go on with her life, she's there to share her story of hope with other family members. And so with this at this point, I'll turn it over to Candy, who has organized questions that.
And you asked the first question. There's my organizational skills.
She just took it out of my hand. And so we have questions, and again, go ahead and if people want to ask them yourselves, but these questions were submitted by other peers and people in the community, and Paul has seen them, so they're okay. So the first question that I would like to ask Paul is, can you read us a passage, an example of what was happening in your mind during your psychosis?
Absolutely. So I chose one that was pretty memorable to me, and to set it up, and if anybody wants to follow along, it's on page 61. But to set it up, basically what I had been doing, I'm a God-believing man and trusting God. And what I was doing was I was researching gods and goddesses and hierarchies and names and symbolism of gods and goddesses. So this was just really rampant in my mind at this time. So this will be very brief. All of a sudden, the tactile hallucinations began to be experienced again. It felt like there was a small tornado in my room, my body in the middle of it. I believed 100 gods and goddesses were making their presence known to me. I felt various degrees of temperature and speeds of the cyclone. I heard screeching, howling, and laughter in my head, and sometimes what seemed to be robotic vibrations encompassed me. My setting of names had flashed through my mind. The gods and goddesses' presence felt like a comforting wind to my sensitive skin. Zeus made his way to me. I felt a little electricity. When Poseidon came around, it felt like tentacles in the wind. Then I felt Pele's warmth spiraling around me, accompanied by a woman's soft humming sound in my mind. I felt like I knew who she was. The complete wind feeling and the voices subsided after about 20 seconds. I thought I had experienced something few people would ever understand. At the time, that experience was a grand finale of enlightenment for me. I felt like I could trust gods and goddesses, and I was well protected. When needed, I believed I could even summon gods and goddesses to play with me. I felt like I could do anything without any repercussions. Then my mind took me a little too far.
Thank you. And Mary Beth, maybe we really should have started with this question, but so can you tell us about Paul and his life before he developed bipolar disorder?
He's a smart young man. He graduated from NAU in 2002. And of course, I'm expecting Paul's very focused and very motivated when he wants something. And so school, sure, he had fun in college, but I was expecting the American dream. He was going to get a good job. He was going to get married. He'd have kids. I'd have grandkids, and everything would be fine. He moved to, a couple of moves, but he ended up in Portland. And in between, prior to that, had started delving more and more into art. So he started with photography, started publishing some of his artwork. When he got to Portland, opened up a studio, but he was working. So he was able to sustain himself, financially, live, in a nice art space, create his artwork. I made the mistake of one time, I'm thinking that it was just a thing that he wanted to do. That's fine, but he'll get back into the American dream, right? But one time I made the mistake when we were visiting him of saying, wow, this is a great hobby. And he put me in my place really quick and said, it's not a hobby, Mom. This is what I want to do. So we and Kathy, I want to preface something here. Paul's dad is his biological father. His father, Jim, is Paul's stepdad.
Okay.
So he's my husband now. Jim is the one that you've met at meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wondered. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So anyway, so we encouraged Paul, if this was what he wanted to do. Of course, I had my doubts. There's the story of starving artists, it's out there for a reason. But all a mother wants is for their children to be happy. You want them to be happy, doing something that they want to do. We would visit them over the summertime a lot. He'd show us his artwork, and he was doing really well. It turned when he broke his foot. I'm not going to get into how he did it, but he was laid up for quite a while. So he couldn't work. So financially, he was living on his art income. At first, we thought, okay, this is kind of good because he's focusing his full attention now on art. He's doing good creating it. He got into framing and all kinds of different levels of the artwork. And so even though I had my doubts that he would be able to live on that, I still wanted to encourage him that, okay, if this is what you want to do, this is great. But I think that was what started or accelerated the stress, obviously, and him trying to sustain himself financially through the artwork solely. He was still motivated. He was still really good at marketing and promoting his work, but it was, we would start seeing while he's losing a lot of weight, I'd ask him how he was doing, and he'd say, oh, it's great. Everything was always great, and he sold stuff. But anyway, that's where we were prior to it being fully out.
Thank you.
For the meltdown.
Before what?
For the meltdown.
Before the meltdown. Yeah.
So, Paul, would you like to talk a little bit about the start of the meltdown?
The start of the meltdown. It's basically stress related, and fear of the unknown. Just trying to completely live off of my artwork. Like my mom said, I would sell things, and some things for thousands of dollars that would sustain me for a couple months. And so it was really a wave, going in and out of, I can survive doing this, to what's coming next? How am I going to survive off this? So what added to the stress even more was I realized I needed to get some income, some secondary income, as opposed to my art income. So I started looking for work, and in hindsight, it could have been because I was starting to disenfranchise myself from the rest of the population, or I started to get deeper into my thoughts, but I couldn't find a job. I had served tables for 12 years as I was pursuing art, and I couldn't find a serving position. I don't know if it's just the way I was relating to the managers I was speaking to, but at the same time I was trying to find these jobs, I was getting deeper into what I came to not understand, but to me, I understood it as a new reality. Started hearing voices in my head and thinking that the people I was talking to could also hear voices in their head and speak telepathically. So then that just started the downward spiral, and ultimately it led me to believe that everybody could, or the mass majority of the population was an enlightened level that could speak telepathically. So I was hearing voices and thinking they were speaking to me, and I was speaking back through my mind, and it was all kind of downhill from there.
That sounds very frightening. Did you feel any kind of fear or recognize that these weren't real?
No, no fear really. It was more elation. I thought this was a new reality to me, and it was the evolution of the human mind and the human psyche. So I felt it was normal, and I felt I was blessed really by God, and but then I started to communicate with Satan, so that wasn't good. That was that, and again, I wasn't too afraid to understand that I thought Satan was communicating to me, because I felt that God was on my side and I could always be protected. So little to no fear, until I started to think that there were people stalking me in the form of doppelgangers or lookalikes, and it wasn't necessarily fear. It was just, it kept building up anxiety, I guess, and just wanting people to leave me alone at a certain point during all of this.
Thank you, Paul. So Mary Beth, I'm going to kind of combine two of these questions that we pre-gave you. We're kind of going off script here. And one is, if you would read a passage, and if you would kind of tell us what you thought was going on at the time from your perspective. So Paul's written this book about what was going on with him, but my understanding is you were in the dark a lot about what was going on. So if you can read a passage that's particularly
Sure.
important to you.
We were in the dark mainly because of not being around him all the time. So he was living in Portland. We would see him probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 times a year. You know, he would come visit us, we'd go visit him. So I put a lot into looking into somebody's eyes, especially one of my children. I can see immediately in their eyes if there's something going on. And so a lot of conversation with Paul would be on the phone. And, you know, when you talk to him on the phone during that time, you know, and say, are you okay? You know, is this happening? Are you depressed? You know, I was trying to figure out what was going on with him. And he would say, Mom, I'm fine, you know, and he would just, he would sound, and I hate to use the word normal, but he would sound normal, you know? And so I would just think, well, you know, maybe it's not that. But the passage I have that preface it like Paul did, he had closed his gallery the summer before. I had visited, Jim and I had visited him. And that's when we first noticed that something was up, and we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later. But so from that point, knowing something's going on with him, but not knowing what. And so I'm trying to figure it out. I have my other son, Chris, bless his heart. he heard a lot of my stories, but he was also very involved because he loves his brother too. He knew something was going on. We didn't know what. We thought maybe it was drugs, but if you ask Paul about drugs, he would adamantly deny. I'm not doing anything. I smoke marijuana once in a while. That's it. But we wanted to blame his behavior on drugs. So anyway, over the course of probably 6 or 7 months, Paul did his thing, getting kicked out of a couple of his friends' homes and then being on the road, and me being frustrated, like, what's going on with him? Maybe he's just depressed from having to give up his gallery. I convinced him somehow to come to Arizona. I said, thinking that he just needed to be around family. He needed to de-stress. He needed to get a job, get back on his feet. So I convinced him somehow to come back. And so when I was reading his book, I had to meet him because he didn't have any money for gas. So I had to meet him outside in Tonopah, which is about an hour from Phoenix, so I could fill up his gas tank. And then he followed me back home in his car. So the passage I'm reading is on page 109, and it says, "We eventually arrived in Phoenix, Arizona. And in Phoenix, my mind turned dark and I wore my sunglasses all hours of the day. My eyes were very sensitive to light. Also, I believed my family was meant to harm me. When I looked into my mom and stepdad's eyes, I saw nothing but darkness." See, this is really hard to read. When I looked at their teeth, I saw the snarling smile of Poseidon, like my parents were possessed by the god. With those circumstances, I lived under their roof for approximately 4 months. I felt like I didn't know my own mom anymore. So that was hard for me because, the whole book is hard for me, but that specifically because all I wanted to do was help my son. I needed to get him help and I didn't know what it was. And reading that's how he saw me at that time early on, it just broke my heart, because I would never want him to think of me that way. Anyway, so yeah, that was very enlightening to me now looking back, and my approach and only wanting to help him and having him think of us as demons, basically, and only wanting to hurt him.
That sounds very scary. And oh boy, I can't.
It was very scary. Yeah.
So would you like to share about that period, Paul, and then how, I guess you went out traveling and you ended up in some mental hospitals? So would you like to share that period? It sounds like a very dark period, at least for your mother.
Yeah, absolutely. For my mom and also Jim, living under their roof and just completely disconnected. Really, looking back, really, really strange, because I've never been like that before. I've always had friends and family around, and I thought that they were poisoning me. So whatever food they bought, like Jim was injecting it with poison and to harm me. So I basically I stopped eating food underneath their own roof, and I went to a food shelter, a food bank, and got a box of food and just ate it out of my vehicle. I wouldn't even eat food with my parents anymore. But my eyes were very, very sensitive. So I was wearing my sunglasses a lot, even in the dark. And when I was driving at night, I had to wear my sunglasses because of the street lights. They were just agonizing to me. So I lived with them for about 4 months, and it just gradually got worse and worse. And thankfully, my grandma and grandpa out in California, they needed some help with their garden and cleaning up around their home. So I went out for a month and lived with my grandfather and grandmother and had a great time. Although I was manic still and still in this deep spiral of darkness, those two were very kind and hospitable. And I mean, I'll never forget the month I shared with my grandma and grandpa out in California as a 39-year-old, or however old I was, 38, 39. And I didn't feel any harm sent my way. I thought that my grandfather and I were actually teaming up against Jim. And so I had somebody on my side to fight the demons of my mom and Jim. But everything was great with them. And then I decided to leave again. And I didn't want to go back to my mom and Jim's house. So I found a place to stay in Laredo, Texas. I would just find rooms on Craigslist, rooms to rent for $200, $300 a month. So then I just started traveling. When I picked up my bags from my mom's place, I didn't even stay but half an hour probably. It was just such a disconnect with my mom. Jim wasn't there. And at the time I was thanking God that Jim wasn't there, because I just didn't want anything to do with him at all. I just thought he was so vicious for some reason. And so I picked up my bag and drove. That day I drove about 20 hours from California through New Mexico. The next day I arrived in Texas, in small town Laredo, stayed there for a month. And then I moved to Austin, stayed there for a month. And then I just would transplant myself basically on a month-to-month basis. And the whole time thinking my family was stalking me, again in the form of doppelgangers. And it was like I couldn't get away from them. I would see whoever I looked at reminded me of somebody in the past, and I would just automatically assimilate that to be stalkers. And I just wanted people to leave me alone. So I tried to get to places where people didn't look like anybody I had known in the past. And some of these houses and the roommates, they didn't remind me of anybody. So that was a little non-annoyance, for lack of a better word. But I ended up in the East Coast in Virginia. I went back to Kansas in Middle America because I'd never been there before. Then I went back east. And so I was just kind of playing ping pong with my mind. And eventually, like my mom said, not like she said, but what eventually happened was when I was in Virginia, then my dad, Paul, he ended up calling the police on me and basically having them rescue me. So they brought me to a mental hospital. There I was court-ordered treatment to take a prescription medication, and which I refused, and I kept going in my dark spiral. And then eventually in my head, I started wrapping around the idea that my friends and family wouldn't harm me. So prior to being medicated, I started wrapping my own head around it and just thinking there's no way that my friends and family would harm me. And further than that, I mean, think about all the logistics that would have to be set in place for them to organize people from state to state to state to state and have them show up in grocery stores and wherever I was. So I just started wrapping my head around and just thinking it's just not possible. It's absolutely not possible. But I still believed in telepathy. So I started migrating back west. I lived with a friend in Ohio, he and his wife, for about a month. And then wanted to be closer to my family just to try and get over it. So I moved back to Arizona, and I was in Holbrook for a little bit. And being unmedicated, I fell back into another spiral. And then I was transported to another medical facility where, again, I was court ordered to take prescription medication. And there I complied. And it took probably about 4 months for it to really kick in, and the voices subsided, and the annoyance or anxiety of people following me wasn't there anymore. So gradually I felt back into what, for lack of a better term, normal again. And moved from Holbrook to beautiful Prescott, and now it's now it's 70 degrees and bright and sunny in the summer, and things are going well, and going to school and back with family and friends, and I don't have those fears anymore, and so on and so forth.
So Paul, your mother approached me about COT, and as a peer and as a peer leader in our community, we don't really believe in court-ordered treatment and try to fight that. So could you, and so when she asked me, you know, I had to have her talk to some other people because I didn't want to answer that and be responsible. Could you share your feelings about COT? And Mary Beth, could you also kind of share, you know, what you went through in getting that in place?
Yeah. So court ordered treatment, I was really against it, absolutely against it, 100%. I requested other forms of healing, like therapeutic massage, anything holistic like herbs. And they said, no, we don't do that. We don't do that here. So basically they had to pin me down and inject me. And I went through the court process, and I requested a lawyer. So there was a court-appointed lawyer that was helping me out, and I said, I don't want to be forced to take medication. I don't think that's the right way for me. Long story short, they said, we're not going to let you leave until you start taking these pills. And at the time, at the very, very beginning, I thought it was a placebo effect. So I just thought they were giving me sugar pills, and because they were all part of this game of enlightenment. So I was just kind of like, all right, sure, I'll take them. You know, there's no effect on me. It's just sugar. So then I just started taking the pills. And so that was, I guess, just in my own mind, how it evolved with me. But I believe in it. I mean, every one of us is individual and has certain different circumstances, but it truly helped me, thankfully. And so the court order was for 1 year of taking the prescription, and so that expired in October of last year, and I've been continuing to take the medication.
Mary Beth?
So when it came to the second crisis event, it's like you said, Kathy, you know, you had seen Paul, you knew he wasn't medicated. I knew he wasn't on medication, but he, you know, wanted to treat it holistically. And deep down, I was praying, please, Lord, let that work. You know, I didn't want to think that there would be any kind of a relapse. But, you know, there was that one meeting when Paul had come, and then the next meeting, Kathy said, I hope you're prepared. He's still having delusions. And so I kind of knew it would be coming again. But what led up to it, he was living in Holbrook. We were seeing him more. I made it a point to make sure that he was coming down to visit us. We were going up to visit him. I had to see him. Like I said earlier, I had to see his eyes. I had to see his face. What forced the issue was, and up to that point when we would see him, you know, he would talk. I mean, nonstop, which is not Paul. I mean, he's usually a pretty laid back, kind of calm person. He likes to talk to people, but it was just nonstop talking. But I was at home one night, and Chris, his brother, sent me a text and said that, or maybe he called me, but he said, Josh, the guy that he was living with in Holbrook, sent him a text and said, you might want to call Paul. He seems a little anxious. So Chris tried calling. Paul didn't answer. Paul somehow butt dialed Chris. So Chris was listening to Paul running through Holbrook, knocking on doors, not understanding what in the world was going on. Paul went back to the house, and then the phone call ended. Of course, trying to get a hold of Paul, he wasn't answering phones. So I'm going to try and make this brief. I called his roommate, Josh. I said, what's going on? And he said, well, he's a little anxious. Now, I had told Josh when Paul moved there, I said, listen, this is what's going on with him. If you see anything, let me know immediately. And he didn't, of course. So anyway, that was the beginning of the spiral. When that happened, and after I hung up with Josh, I told Jim, we're going to Holbrook tomorrow. We drove up the next day. And as soon as I saw Paul, I knew. I mean, it was very evident that he had definitely spiraled, that he was hallucinating again. I wanted so badly for him to make the decision that he needed the help. I didn't want to have to do that. I didn't want to have to force him. I didn't want him to hate me again. Would he hate me if I tried to force him to do something? So I tried to convince him that he needed to see the doctor. And he resisted. He said, Mom, I'm fine. And I said, well, I really think you need help. I didn't say help. I had to be really careful with my wording with him. But anyway, so the next day he promised me that he would go see the doctor. So the next day he puts me on FaceTime and walks into the clinic. I was getting on him. You need to go, you need to go, you need to go. So he puts me on FaceTime, walks into the clinic, sets my face in front of the girl, the receptionist. And he says, this is my mom. She wants me to see a doctor. And she looks at Paul and she said, well, Paul, we have you scheduled for 2 weeks. And I said, he needs to see a doctor right now. And she looks at me and then right at that moment, Paul says, Sonny, do you know what Tarachi Taro is? And he starts going off on this tangent of this bizarre Taro game. And she looks at me and she goes, okay, have a seat. The doctor's with somebody right now. But anyway, so that started the ball rolling. He then put me on FaceTime after he had seen the doctor. The doctor told him, we think you need to be admitted for help. And he refused. Again, he was refusing. He didn't think he needed it. I don't know if he was scared. But again, I wanted him to do it on his own. After he left the doctor's office, she sent me the paperwork to have him court ordered, brought in. I gave him a day to come to that decision on his own. I tried to explain to him different things, how somebody with diabetes needs medication to be well. Somebody with Parkinson's, his aunt has Parkinson's, she needs medication to be well. I said, it's the same kind of a thing, Paul. You have an illness, you need medication to be well. But he didn't do it. So I had the paperwork, I had it filled out. It was very difficult. I got my signature notarized. I had my email sitting there and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to hit the send button. And I started crying. I said, Jim, I can't do it. And I said a prayer to God. I said, God, you have to do something. I can't do it. And I walked away from my computer. And that night is when God took over and Paul went into a bar and was acting erratically. And they called the police on him. And that's what, once he got to the hospital in Winslow, I talked to the nurse there. I saw what was going on and it was a very easy decision. I walked over and I hit the button because they knew what he needed. But they were going to just release him unless, because he wasn't threatening anybody, so that's what did it. God intervened and said, okay, I'll make the situation easier for you. And that's how we got picked up.
So Paul, now look, we're going back and forth. Okay.
Yeah, we are.
I can undo my organization. So Paul, when you thought you might need help, you already said you considered holistic type of things. And how did that journey go for you? I'm trying to read over here on this question, but you know the question. I think we know why you didn't decide to do that, but is that still part of your journey, your spiritual part in your recovery?
Seeking holistic medication?
holistic or other alternative spiritual, religious?
Spiritual, yes. I pray, meditate. As far as like herbs and things like that, not necessarily. I try to exercise, go hiking. There's some great trails and lakes around Prescott area that I try to get out and do hiking. But I really don't feel that anxiety anymore, or little to none, I guess I should say. God will always be in my life. It's just how it is.
So Paul, as a peer and listening to you, there's times in your discussion that I feel very anxious, and my break or the when I became really symptomatic was when I was about 15 to 16. And I can really relate to a lot of the thoughts and the feelings that you had. I just wondered, do you ever fear breakthrough symptoms? And I've been left with this anxiety, and I haven't become symptomatic in 50 years, 60 years. I'm telling my age now. But do you have that anxiety that it will come back?
Every now and again, for sure, because it is scary. To think that what I went through, I mean, there is a possibility, but I believe in the way I'm working through it, and it seems to have been going swimmingly the past year and a half. So, but there is that little fear factor, I guess, to come back into it. But as far as this past year and a half has gone, it's been really well. So I don't try and think about it. That's for sure.
So Mary Beth, is there any family history of mental illness or bipolar disorder? A lot of people ask those questions.
Yeah, they do. And before I took my NAMI family to family class, I didn't think so. And that, going back to when this all started rearing its ugly head and trying to figure out what was going on with Paul, and not having anything like this in our family history, I didn't think about mental illness until Paul came to live with us, and I actually saw him hallucinating. That's when I went, okay, I think it might be mental illness. And Chris, he'd get out on Reddit and into the forums and look up symptoms, and we were Googling symptoms, and Chris would send me articles, Jim would send, find things. So we were trying to diagnose Paul on our own. But getting back to the NAMI family to family class, that's when I learned that the mental disorder umbrella is so broad. And seeing what all falls under that, yes, we do have anxiety disorders in our family. And Chris, if you want this part cut out, you can. Chris and his brother went through a period of, I don't know how many years, probably at least 2 years, where he was debilitated with panic attacks. And fortunately for me, it was before Paul went through his. So I was focused on trying to fix Chris at that time, and I didn't have them both doing it. But Chris went through a period where he had panic attacks to the point where he couldn't work. He was in the emergency room a lot. I remember one night he called me, and I was walking him trying to walk him out of an attack. I mean, it was just absolutely horrible. So Chris experienced that. I have a sister who has addictive behavior. And that's another long story. But yeah, after learning what all falls under that, then definitely we do have a history. I even myself can think back to my early 20s when I had a period where I went through panic attacks. I got to the point where I didn't want to go out in public. if I was in a restaurant, I couldn't sit in the middle. I mean, so yeah. But it wasn't until I took my NAMI class that I realized that yes, we do have a history. It just shows itself in different ways.
And on kind of on that same thought, what would you recommend for caregivers and loved ones of people with a mental health emergency like Paul was going through?
You know, that's a hard one, because I've talked with some people, a couple of people, one just recently, that, you know, people have to want to help them. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people, what they do is they try to throw money at a problem, or they try to, you know, push them off to the side, and maybe if we just let them do their thing, they'll come out of it. So that's really difficult. I was adamant that my son was not going to be living. All I could picture when Paul was going through this, all I could picture was, you know, how when you're driving down the street and you come to the corner and you see the guy with the, you know, obviously homeless, yelling at the world. That's how I pictured Paul if I didn't stop it. And so I do want parents to know that you can't give up. You know, there is help out there, and there is hope out there. And Kathy, you're a prime example of that. You know, you were talking about Paul having anxious feelings about maybe this coming back, and I have that, of course, but I look at you, Kathy, and how you've led your life over the last, you know, 50 years, and holy cow. Sorry, I don't know if you're that old or not, but
She is.
anyway,
She is.
okay, anyway, that seeing you and going to my NAMI class and hearing your story, I knew that Paul could be very successful in his life. It was just a matter of getting him to that point where he is right now, actually. I mean, I'm just really extremely proud of him.
So I totally agree. And I think, you know, in many ways, your family shielded him, protected him. And what amazes me is that Paul wasn't arrested, you know, and as we're going through this, I'm just wishing that there were some judges and lawyers that could hear this story. And these are the people that we have to reach to understand, you know, what mental illness is about. And I know that my journey was made even more difficult because I did go to jail on a number of occasions for misdemeanors or whatever, but it was the stigma. And even afterwards, Paul, you know, you're starting on kind of another journey. And the stigma that I have faced has been enormous as I move forward. And I'm very open, you know, that I'm a person with a mental illness, but it really changes conversations.
And I'll interject in that. One of the things with Paul is I'm so proud of him for being very open about it. You know, a lot of people, they don't want to talk about it, you know, because of the stigma, you know. And so, you know, with Paul, amazing that he wasn't arrested. It is. When you read what he was doing in that book, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg. We've heard so many other stories of what he did.
Oh, look at the look on his face.
A sequel.
I know.
A sequel is coming.
He knows.
I survived.
He survived it, but I'll tell you, laying in bed at night, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and just praying, God, send the angels down to protect him, because I didn't have a clue what he was doing. And I really do think that kept him safe. I mean, he even says in his book how he felt the angels around him. You know, my sister Kathy and her husband and Jim and I took the brunt of being the evil people while he was on the road. I mean, and that's still hard for me to see, because Kathy and I, we had very long talks about Paul, a lot of crying, you know, what to do, how, and she kept assuring me through the whole thing, he's going to come back. I had given up. I really thought that I had lost him and that he wouldn't be back just from the way he was treating us. And she kept saying he's going to be back. And she kept assuring me he's going to be back. And she was right, you know, but I gave it up. And that's how I found NAMI. Actually, I was looking for grief support because I was grieving. I felt like I had lost my son. And that's how I found NAMI.
And you know, that's so many parents it doesn't end up this way. You know, the journey is much different for them. And I think some of it has to do with getting early help, and the families being supportive. And, you know, with bipolar and schizophrenia, they're very different from many of the mental illnesses. These are very, very serious. And sometimes we think recovery applies to everyone, but, you know, we also have to recognize that many people, family members, you know, go on to take care. I know that with Candy, you know, it's a lifetime thing for her. Her son just, you know, I'm not going to say he's not going to recover, but, you know, the challenges are there every day for her. And that's the reality for many, many parents. And it's hard for them.
And along this line, Paul, so why did you open up and why did you write this book? What was the purpose of writing the book?
Well, simply enough to shed light on my situation to my immediate family, my mom, my dad, brother, sister-in-law, everybody, my aunt, multiple aunts, friends. So I've always been a pretty open individual, especially with my brother. And so going through this, I would share things like after I got to the situation where I was comfortable enough to write a book, I started asking questions like to my brother. I'm like, so do you remember that one time in Portland where you tapped my leg with your foot and I was speaking telepathically to you? You can do that, right? He's like, no, man, I wish I could. So it's little things like that. I'm like, man, you know, there were so many coincidences that kept me in my loop, in my spiral, that it seemed to be a reality. So first and foremost, it was to shed light on my experience to friends and family. And secondly, to hopefully help others through my experience, my shared experience. And when I set out to write my book, I thought to myself, you know, if I could just help one other person with this book, then that means a lot to me. So it's proved to help at least one other person. I've been getting some good reviews, good remarks from people I know, people I don't know, about the situation, how it enlightens them to what mental illness can be. And to digress a little bit on a previous question that my mom kind of alluded to, was what would help me at the time understand. What would have helped me is if I would have learned about mental illness in like 7th grade, 8th grade, high school health classes. Health classes teach us a lot about physical ailments, but I don't remember one thing about learning or even touching on what mental illness is. So as an adult, I'm thinking it's normal. And if I would have learned about it maybe in junior high or high school a little bit, I would have probably researched a little bit, and maybe that would have aided me to seek help. Yeah, I think it would have helped a lot it could help a lot if it is taught more in junior high realms. But yeah, so I wrote the book to touch light on the situation and hopefully help others.
So I will assure you, Paul and Mary Beth, that you've helped a lot more than just a couple of people. A lot of people don't share that, and you might hear it years later. But at this point, I would like to invite other relatives of yours to maybe share, their experience. Is there anyone that'd like to speak up and share?
I'm actually going to change everybody back to the gallery view, and I know we have some people here who, oops, and why you're the only one on, Paul. I'm going to be working on that while we do this. And maybe now, can everybody see everybody? Maybe if you turn your camera on.
Okay, so there's
Yeah. Okay.
Paul's brother, Chris, and sister. So would you like to share?
Just unmute, and also if you've had an experience with the book, it'd be great to share that too at this time by reading the book. Do you know how? They don't want to be on. Okay. Oh, he's gonna do it. Okay.
Yes, Chris.
I'm unmuted now. With the book itself, primarily, I considered it a huge milestone for Paul to share not only what he experienced, but in a way what his family experienced as well, because the book definitely, it's a first person experience, but we were also there through the entire thing. And a lot of it, just the fear that I had and my mom, my dad, of the unknown of what we were dealing with. I mean, I can go through a million different stories, even more so that aren't in the book, probably because if all the stories were in the book, then it would be, 3,000 pages long. But it was a learning experience for me with the mental illness piece, because as my mom mentioned, we never felt like we as a family had any history of mental illness. But then we started realizing, when we started focusing more precisely on what we've all gone through, we started to understand it a little bit more. And to be able to know that what Paul went through and how he can share the book itself was huge. And so now we all get to dig into Paul's mind a little bit as we read through the pages. And so that way we can maybe use that as a reference point even better with everybody else that we come across. Because, for Britt and I, we have friends that deal with bipolar. And in the beginning, we didn't really know how to talk to them. We just knew them as friends, and that was just their condition. But now, with Paul's experience, we've learned so much. And so now our language has changed a little bit. And our conversations are a little bit different with our friends that have bipolar. And that's huge for us. We've learned along the way. And so, I mean, I'm grateful for the way that things have turned out with Paul, because there were some struggles along the way. And the times where Paul would actually talk to me, because there was months and months and months of radio silence. And then all of a sudden I would get a phone call from him. And it's just a relief on how everything worked out in a mental learning way, and also in the positive family way as well.
Honestly, it's really just witnessing this beautiful family work together. And I definitely have a lot of mental health issues in my family. And even still, schizophrenia, bipolarism, and lots of depressions, prescriptions. And even still, it was a beautiful experience to watch Mary Beth and my husband, Chris, work together. And it was not even a question of anything. They just knew to research. They were automatically doing things to make sure that they went through information. And Chris was following Paul and making sure, if he didn't hear from him, he was reaching out to all connections to just, grapple at anything to find him and stay in touch. I mean, the love is so strong in this family. And there's so many families, at least in my side, unfortunately, that it's not instinctual for everybody to even do a little Google search on things to be aware of, and maybe things to do or not to do, and that there's hope. And so this book, it was beautiful to watch when Paul published it, how many people that know us, or just by 6 degrees of Paul, that wanted to buy this, read it thoroughly, and reach out to us and say that this is just so powerful, especially with more and more growing awareness on mental health. So, and personal wellness. And yeah, and we're just so grateful to learn from him, and that he's back in so many ways. And yeah.
So Paul's dad.
So Paul's dad.
I'm here.
Or his aunt, would you like to share anything?
I'm glad we're here on this day. It's a relief, because Paul's been hard work through this, and I'm grateful for everyone's contribution to his well-being, and his mom's incredible effort to keep him safe or within view. But you know what? I don't consider schizophrenic or bipolar the end of the world, because I believe in the medications in today's world to, recreate new, get the, what's in our brain, the neurons certainly, but the chemical balance. So there's no other way but a chemical adjustment. So I'm all for forced medical care when a person can't think for himself. And so that's why I called and had him picked up in Virginia. Perfect opportunity to get him started. And to me, that was square one, hardcore love. Where he is today is a good place. So all I can say is stay with the medications. Holistic stuff is good. Reiki is good. Spiritual journey stuff. But for mental metabolism, I mean, you got to have chemical balance, and just keep taking the pills, because you have come a long ways, Paul, and been hard work. I've been, I was with you through your whole journey, and yeah, so I'm happy for you.
Sounds like you're proud of him.
So,
Oh, of course, always proud.
Okay.
But we have to survive. We have to survive situations in our lives, and Paul had his survival test, and whether it's through whatever, he just survived it. So that's character, that's strength, that's courage. And for brother, sister, mom, aunts, and friends, we were right there with him, believing in him, but knew he was messed up, so you can't cure mental illness without medication. So weed, whatever else is maybe on the table, just doesn't agree with me.
okay,
So medication, man.
Thank you, and it's so wonderful to see that medication works for Paul, but I would like to remind everyone that medication does not work for everyone, and sometimes medications quit working. But the other piece is that we all know that medication is a very hard choice, because it creates metabolic syndrome and does shorten life. So people with schizophrenia and sometimes bipolar live about 25 years younger. So to take the medication, is a very personal decision. And it is not comfortable. I just wanted to share that piece. Go ahead.
Jim, did you want to take yourself off of mute and add anything?
Okay, well,
Go ahead.
I love my wife. I love Paul very much. So it was so frustrating to see things that Paul was going through and not understanding at all where it was coming from, what he was thinking about. When he moved into the house, it was obvious that we were on two different levels of reality, but I had no idea what he was thinking. I had no idea that he was afraid I was poisoning him or anything like that. There was tension in the house, of course, because we weren't communicating well. And I think the communication, I think the thing that helped us the most was when Mary Beth started going to NAMI, she would come home and she would tell me what she heard during the day and talked about the other people. And I'd look in the book at different things, but I started to being able to understand the communication a little bit better. Even though I didn't know exactly what he was thinking, I started realizing that his thought process was different than mine. And maybe I needed to try to listen to him a little bit better instead of making snap judgments about what he was thinking or what he was doing at the time. So at the time that he was living at the house, he was frustrated with us. We were frustrated with him. We weren't able to really hold long conversations at equal levels. And so I think that was the most difficult part. So I think NAMI just did so many good things for both of us, Paul and his mom and myself. You know, I think that the whole process, Mary Beth talked about it. I lived it every day as well. And so the frustration was there and it was really uncomfortable. I remember at one point, Mary Beth was talking about going out to Virginia when she found out where he was and going to see him for perhaps the last time, just so he could see Paul before we'd never see him again. And we had that discussion and I was kind of against it and not knowing exactly what would transpire. And later on, we learned from Paul that it probably wouldn't have been a good idea at the time. And I might have pushed this even further apart or push things off. So letting Paul have his own journey to a certain extent, we were fortunate through his dad to be able to know where he was because he was talking to his dad. And being able to follow him to a certain extent helped us out. NAMI, Paul himself, taking the bull by the horns, bringing himself back to Arizona so that we could all be together and work through it. All those things were very important to us. And so right now, we have a wonderful relationship. Paul and I go out to the golf course periodically, get frustrated together. And he comes over with his friend, Katie, and we have a great time with her as well. And life is good right now. So it's just a matter of you take day by day right now. And now that we all understand and we're all on the same page with everything, it's just a whole lot easier. If things were to happen in the future that Paul was getting anxious or having some anxiety or whatever, we'd all be able to work through it together, I think.
Yeah.
Not being able to communicate well kept us from doing that earlier on.
And I want to say that the title of this talk was One Family's Journey. And with all of you, the family here, it really does highlight that this was a family's journey.